cricket world. Now the rule seems coming to an...
Welcome to episode 34 of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I am your co-host, Mashal St. Patrick Hewitt, and my partner in crime, he's here as ever. Santoki, where you at?
Hey, Mashal, pleasure to be back on. For those of you not in the UK, we're still in the lockdown, so there's not much to look forward to at the moment for us. But I am looking forward to this upcoming podcast interview, Matt.
Yes. So we're 34 episodes deep, and we've had some favorite podcasts. We've had some ex-West Indian cricketers on. We've had current West Indian cricketers on. We've had people behind the scenes at West Indies cricket. But this is the episode I'm most looking forward to, as we have. I'll see how he likes my intro here as we have the great Fazeer Mohammed with us today. For those of you who are keen observers of West Indies cricket, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Fazeer is the number one commentator, I would say journalist as well, with regards to what's going on in West Indies cricket. Yes, there are obviously others who are on TV who we also love hearing from. But for me personally, Fazeer is my go-to guy. So it's an honor to get Fazeer on the podcast today. Fazeer, how are you?
I'm fine. It's a privilege to be on the podcast with you guys. And let me just say that flattery will get you everywhere. And after that sort of build-up, it could only be downhill from here.
Well, you know, I tried my best, but let's get straight into it then, Fazeer. So when, you know, Santoki and I were talking quite a lot, once you agreed that you were going to come on, Santoki and I were talking quite a lot about what types of things are we going to ask Fazeer. We don't want to cover old ground. We also made it a bit of a mailbag episode. So lots of you sent in, when we said that we were going to interview Fazeer, loads of you sent questions in. So we'll try and get to as many of those as possible. And it's good to see that lots of you were excited by the fact that we were going to get Fazeer on. But Fazeer, I think the best way to start is, because I think you've built up a bit, you've got like a meme culture behind you because of the Shannon Gabriel incident.
Got him! Why did he do that?
If people didn't know who you were beforehand, they definitely knew who you were after the Shannon Gabriel incident. But then I think that almost does you a bit of a disservice. So in your own words, who is Fazeer Mohammed? If you had to describe what you do and who you are.
I suppose you would have to say a bit of a lunatic in some respects to be continuing to follow West Indies cricket as much as I do. But I grew up in the game. I've always loved the game, as many of us from the West Indies, with West Indian heritage, with West Indian root. You would have grown up, certainly in my time. The West Indies were arguably the greatest force that ever walked onto a cricket field. And you were caught up in that. I grew up playing the game with, I was a scorer with my dad's cricket club. So therefore, cricket is essentially in my blood, for better or for worse. I mean, I love other sports as well, but there's almost that natural affinity towards the game. And from that point on, as aspirations, as with many young people who aspire in sport to play for the West Indies, I was never good enough. I managed to make it into the Trinidad and Tobago under-19 team for one match, and that was it. So at least I can claim to have some sort of recognition, although I was really not up to that standard. And at some point in my academic career, when I was failing everything else, I recognized the only skill I had was a bit of writing. And so I got into that, failed my A-levels, failed everything else academically, got a job with a local newspaper. And that's where it moved on from a weekly newspaper to a daily newspaper in Trinidad, then getting opportunities in radio, basically being around at the right time. Things just appear to work out for me, for which I'm grateful. And getting opportunities on radio, doing commentary, and then getting the breaks in television, which I never thought I would have, because I'm sure, as you recognize, it is a medium almost entirely dominated by former international players. So for individuals like myself to get opportunities, which would have been almost considered normal in the time of a Tony Cozier and so many outstanding broadcasters, Harsha Bogle from India, for example, is a notable exception to the rule. To get the odd opportunity in that area has really given me a tremendous privileges in that regard, and that sums it up. Basically, I'm just someone who loves the game, who has a real passion for the game, who I would spend a lot of time reading, and much of my schoolboy reading was about books and autobiographies of cricketers. So the West Indies Cricket Annual that Cozier would have done for many years is what I grew up on. That was my essential reading. So that would have helped me in getting a sense of not just what is happening now in cricket, but understanding the history and the context of the game as well.
Loads of brilliant, love that already, Fazeer, and loads of things were running through my head when you were saying that. So, firstly, I see you on TV quite a lot. You're commentating as well, radio and on TV, writing. What's your number one suit though? Like, what's your favorite thing to do? Is it the commentating, or is it the writing, or is it the analyst roles on TV? What do you prefer doing, or you love all of it?
If the pay was as good as it is on television, I would love to do radio commentary every day of my life. It's because to me, radio commentary, yes, television commentary is where it's at. Everybody's on television now and you can see the images, but radio is what I grew up on. I always remember, as I was a 10-year-old turning 11, the 1975-76 West Indies tour of Australia. I was sitting with my dad in the middle of the night in our gallery, as we call it, or the porch, as some will call it, sitting in a hammock, and we're listening to cricket. In the middle of the night was the Boxing Day Test match, and I can't remember who the commentator was. Might have been Alan McGilvray, one of the venerable voices of Australian cricket. And he said, "Welcome to a glorious Boxing Day morning here in Melbourne, Australia. Brilliant sunshine and whatever it was." And you heard the noise of the crowd in the background and the voices of the commentators, Tony Cozier and so many others. And it was dead of night for us, of course, back in the Caribbean. And it just seemed so much otherworldly. It seemed as if you're broadcasting from Saturn or from Jupiter to hear commentary, cricket action from another part of the world. And essentially, I was hooked from that point on, because what you heard were broadcasters, skilled, trained broadcasters who, yes, loved the game, but also had that ability to convey that image, to paint that picture for you. And I always remember first getting into broadcasting and then getting opportunities to travel around the Caribbean. And I met a young man from St. Vincent. We were doing a one-day international there. And he came up to me and said, "Sir, I just wanted to let you know that my grandmother enjoys listening to your broadcast because she was born, her eyes deteriorated and she was blind. And she said that I paint a picture for her, that when I'm broadcasting the cricket and describing all different things apart from the game, that she feels she can see the cricket." And that to me was the most flattering thing I've heard in a long time. And that's why growing up, I've always enjoyed radio broadcasts. I enjoy the TV environment. Yes, it's far more rewarding financially. But if there was one thing I'd like to be doing all the time, it was waking up this morning, walking to the ground to do radio commentary.
Love that. And obviously, I think when people, certainly within as a child when I was growing up, and I'm fairly certain for a large majority of people in the Caribbean, particularly outside the Caribbean for the diaspora, Tony Cozier was the voice of West Indies. And rightly or wrongly, I'm going to say that you are essentially the next person after Tony, once Tony sadly passed. Was Tony an influence on you? Were you two close in terms of growing up in the commentary game, or did you really not cross paths that often?
Tony was a huge influence on the paths that I chose, because, as I said, listening to him from very early on, you're right, he is the voice of West Indies cricket. And I have said, sadly, with his passing in May of 2016, that we had just lost the Gary Sobers of cricket coverage, because I don't think enough recognition is paid, because we all hear about John Arlott and Aggers and so many others, because the English environment, and to a lesser extent the Australian environment, dominates the narrative on the game. It's always what the Aussies say. It's always what the English say. You hardly ever hear what the West Indians say, because we're such a small number. And Tony Cozier, if less people forget, was not just an outstanding broadcaster on radio, not just an outstanding broadcaster on television. He was a world-class journalist. He put out this West Indies Cricket Annual from 1969 until 1991. His appetite for his work ethic in the game is second to none. And I don't think I've met anyone else in my lifetime who had such a passion for whatever it was, whether it be cricket, whether it be engineering, whether it be medicine, whatever, who had such a passion and such a devotion to his craft And I had the privilege of working alongside him in the press box. And I made it clear that I really admired him. And I was honored that he would consider me a contemporary, because when I started working in media in the early 1990s, around that time, I would spend time in the press box, just being in his company to see how he did things, and his very thorough nature, and the way he was very impatient with those who were sloppy with their work, who felt that they was just so good that they didn't need to cover the nuts and bolts of the game and understand what they were talking about. So again, it was a privilege for me to be alongside him. It was an even greater privilege to work alongside him in the commentary box, either in radio or in television. It would be a stretch to say that we were great friends, because his social set was different to mine. He was 25 years older than me, but I considered it an honor to be someone who was not just an acquaintance, but he would. Probably the greatest thing that happened to me was that he would occasionally email me to say, well, something had just happened and he was about to blow his top, and he would ask me my opinion on something. I said, Tony, seriously, you're asking my opinion on something about the game that you probably invented yourself? But yeah, he is to me. I can't think of anyone else in the game, whether in England or any other part of the world, who would have really covered all the bases as comprehensively as Tony Cozier did when you're talking about the game of cricket from a broadcasting journalism coverage point of view.
You said that you started working in the media in the early 90s, which would have been the beginning of the decline in terms of the West Indies team performances.
Thanks for reminding me of that.
From your opinion, working in the media, from your perspective, do you think there was not arrogance, but do you think complacency set in during that period within players, coaching, and the system, which kind of led to that decline?
Absolutely. Of course, complacency would not be the primary reason. But yeah, I mean, we were in an era. Just remember, no other team in the history of international cricket has gone through 15 years or anywhere close to 15 years not losing a test series. And again, it's important that we remind ourselves of that, because, you know, people in the modern era, or the Aussies of Steve Warren's home were the greatest ever, or the greatest series was 2005 when England won the Ashes and all of that sort of thing. And because there are so few of us as West Indians and West Indian broadcasters, even when you shout from the rafters, it isn't being said often enough. The West Indies went 15 years without losing a test series, home or away. And those were the days when you didn't have the likes of the minnows floating around. They were all well-established test-playing nation. So the West Indies went 15 years. And when you go through that period, when you're hammering people 5-0, when you're going to Australia and winning 3-1 and essentially virtually invincible, complacency does step in. Certainly from the media's point of view, certainly from the fans' point of view, you almost take it for granted that you're going to a test match just to see the West Indies win. You're not going for a contest. You're going to enjoy your players dominate the opposition. So yes, there would be an element of complacency, but I think that the warning signs were there along the way, because some of those series getting closer towards the 1990s, the West Indies were very fortunate. Against England in 1990, we lost the first test match in Jamaica, should have lost the second test match in Trinidad, but was saved by the rain and delaying tactics from our bowlers. In 2 years before that, there was controversy in Barbados, where Imran Khan maintains they should have actually won that series 3-0 rather than draw it 1-1, but for umpiring decisions. So there are a number of points along the way when we should have seen that, if not the complete deterioration, that the absolute dominance was gradually being chipped away, but we never really took full notice.
And then, I mean, we can try and fill in the gaps between the start of that deterioration to 2021 and the situation we currently find ourselves in. But you know what, Fazeer? I'm not gonna. It's almost too easy to. It's almost too easy to go down the bemoaning what we currently see as we record right now. The second ODI has just finished against Bangladesh, and predictably the side lost again. But the pullout of 12 players to go to Bangladesh. Yes, it's COVID, but that's nothing new. We saw in 2009? I think the players pulled out of the home series. If we go back to 98 and players nearly pulling out of the South Africa, none of this stuff is new to me in terms of players pulling out of tours. But where I guess we want to go in the context of what's currently happening in Bangladesh and the players that we currently see there. Does this Bangladesh tour speak to the weakness at regional level? And if it does speak to that, how long would you say this weakness at regional level has been going on? So to give you some context, Fazeer, Santoki and I recorded a brief chat yesterday, and we were talking about the fact that the last genuine, and you may disagree, the last genuine international batsman across all formats that we had to break out of the regional system for me were Shiv, Ronnie Sarwan, Chris Gale. If you want to put Marlon in there at a stretch because of things that he achieved, by all means do so. But I tend to say those three. But for Fazeer, those players all broke. Shift debuted in 95, 96.
94.
94, sorry. Chris and Ronnie came 99, 2000-ish.
Correct.
That's 21 years, Fazeer, since we've had batsmen who, yes, you can say hope in white ball cricket, but I mean batsmen where you look across the formats and say they can dominate at the top class level. What do you put that down to, Fazeer?
You're right when it comes to the deterioration. And again, if I could just add to that context, because you mentioned what is going on right now. You mentioned 2009 also against Bangladesh. And just to give you that sense of the context of the strength and depth, you remember Kerry Packer, 1978-79, around that time? The West Indies, again, with what was virtually a second string team, because it's interesting that we're just coming out of that incredible performance by India, where only two players, Ajinkya Rahane and Cheteshwar Pujara, played all 5 test matches. In 1978, when the West Indies were playing Australia in the Caribbean, only Alvin Kalicharan and Derek Parry, the off-spinner, played all 5 tests, because there was the Packer exodus after the second test match, when basically the West Indies Cricket Board at the time decided that they were going to introduce some new players because they knew the Packer players weren't going to be available later in the year, and all the Packer players pulled out. So to cut a long story short, when the West Indies went to India in 78-79, they were essentially ridiculed as a second string team, yet across 6 test matches against a full-strength Indian team with Sunil Gavaskar, Anshuman Gaikwad, Dilip Vengsarkar, and so on, the West Indies only lost 1-0 and only lost a test match that was really close fought on a seaming track in Madras, or Chennai as it's now known. And that showed us the strength and depth of West Indies cricket. The West Indies had players like Sylvester Clarke, Malcolm Marshall, Alvin Greenwich, so many others who would actually walk into other people's test teams but couldn't make the West Indies side. It was from that point on, I would say from around the late 1980s, early 1990s, where we started to see a deterioration in the standard of our domestic game. I struggle to come up with a definitive answer as to why that would have happened, but by the time we got around to 2009, we knew we were going to struggle with the second team, even if it was against Bangladesh. Bangladesh, who were then the whipping boys of international cricket, and are still are to some extent, except in the shorter formats of the game. But you got that sense, you got that clear understanding that our domestic game was gradually becoming much the weaker for all that, whether it was the pitches, whether it was the absence of focus by the authorities, whether it was the players themselves who were not as committed to the game as we thought that they should have. But it's very stark to notice how here we are, some 40 years on from 78, 79, and you had a second string team that was so competitive against India, to now where it's almost taken for granted, even if it was our first team, that we would lose to Bangladesh, and therefore the weakened team really has no fighting chance.
Do you put that? What do you put that on, though? Do you put that more on administrators, players, the quality, as you say, the quality of the pitches? Although in the last 2 years, I think they've probably improved more than I've seen them in a long while, in terms of allowing batsmen to actually make runs. Where, if you had to, because I know it's a myriad of factors, but if you had to hone down on one thing, where would you most place the blame?
I think I would have to place it on the, if we're actually pinpointing something here, I would have to say the administrators, not because it's easy to beat up on the administrators, but you're in charge of the game. You're the one who not only has to insist on standards, if you talk about protecting the legacy of West Indies cricket, and appreciate that you can't accept mediocrity. You can't accept mediocrity from the players as far as their performances. You can't accept mediocrity in administration, because there have been a number of embarrassments along the way in West Indies cricket. You highlighted the issue where the players stand off before they went to South Africa. I mean, just think about that for a moment. You've got a team from the West Indies with our history of slavery and indentureship going to South Africa for a first full test tour, and you have a standoff that forces someone of the stature of a Nelson Mandela to have to write a letter virtually begging you to come to South Africa. That in itself should be an embarrassment to West Indies cricket. And we've had many other things along the way. We had a situation where the West Indies went to the Under-19 World Cup in South Africa the year before with 7 players who were overage. And that's how players like Chris Gayle and Darren Ganga got the opportunity to go on that campaign. I mean, we laugh at these things, but there were also opportunities where there were these, and I'm sure you all were sickened by it as well, the constant duels between West Indies Cricket Board and the West Indies Players Association, where they would go on and on about it. At the start of every series, at the start of every tour, players would either be threatening to pull out or actually pull out. And then the West Indies board would stand their ground and lose the court matter and lose the arbitration and have to pay significant sums of money. And people were really disillusioned by all of that. And you got the sense that the administrators at that time were more concerned with winning battles off the field than ensuring that the product on the field was being taken care of. And that's why I say, so I'm not forgiving the players, because I have no issues with any trade union, be it West Indies Players Association or whatever, championing for the cause of their of who they represent, because that's what it's all about. But the players themselves need to step back and take notice that whether they, and I don't know if they recognize these things, and that they are supposed to be protectors of arguably the greatest legacy in the history of the game. For a nation such as small as ours to have achieved as much as we would have with the few players that we have had, and I don't think it's any secret, we are like Brazil in football, that you have your country and you have Brazil in football. In the same way, you go to Australia and they probably know more about the legacy of West Indies cricket than many of us do as far as the contemporary appreciation. So I don't think enough was done by our players at the time to work on their games, to develop their game, but they weren't pushed. They weren't, the standards weren't as rigorous by the administrators. And just to draw a quick reference, in 1998-99, that same tour of South Africa, Dennis Waite, the legendary physio who set the standards as far as fitness in West Indies cricket, he was told to back off. Yeah. He was told, you are pushing the players too hard, and we need to have you take it easy with this fitness regimen. And he was gone from the job after that tour. And from that point on, and even before that, of course, but that more or less concretized that West Indies cricket was on the downward spiral. And we didn't know it was going to last so long, because it continues now. But you got the sense that the inmates were starting to run the asylum when it came to West Indies cricket at that point.
I think that was a good comparison with Brazil, in terms of West Indies do tend to be the neutrals' favourites. I mean, the classic line from overseas people always, cricket needs a good West Indies, just because most people have the memories of that great Clive Lloyd era. But it's interesting, when we spoke to Nikita Miller last month, he did suggest that the decline in domestic cricket was partly due down to the lack of desire from players in their pride in the West Indies badge and colours. And he also said that the lack of competitive action in domestic cricket against international players was hindering their development, because they were only playing against fellow mediocre players. So especially in 2021, when teams are going to have to rely on chopping and changing their squad and relying on reserve players to come in, West Indies are going to struggle in 2021. So long term, how would you sort of improve the domestic scene? What would be the roadmap to kind of build some improvements, or is this just a terminal decline?
Well, I would hope it's not a terminal decline. It feels like a terminal decline, though, because of how long this has been going on. But I just think it's about insistence on standards because, you know, and Marshall, you touched on it a little while ago. A couple of years ago, we had just beaten England badly in the Caribbean to reclaim the Wisden Trophy. They were beaten by over 300 runs on a sporting pitch in Barbados, routed for just 73. They were thrashed by 10 wickets in Antigua, again, on a sporting pitch in Antigua. And yes, we lost the second test match in St. Lucia with a relatively weakened team, and the series had already been won. But you look at that, and it seems as it was almost 20 years away. So what was the motivation then? What was the focus then? Is it that whenever we're playing England, we're so supremely motivated? Because again, we saw it in 2017 with that famous win at Headingley. We saw it just a few months ago with that win at Southampton, and then everything fell apart from that. And that's the infuriating thing about it, because the ability is there, the potential to really not necessarily dominate the world again automatically, but to be consistently competitive, and that is the concern. So I take Nikita's point, and I mean, Nikita Miller is someone who's been really committed and dedicated to playing for Jamaica, to representing Jamaica. He's had very few opportunities at senior international level. But I think if the players are lacking in focus, if the players really take their places for granted, that's where the administrators come in. That's where the administrators need to read the Riot Act, whether you like it or not, to tell you whether you take it. And we have that situation right here in my native Trinidad and Tobago, where we've just selected a squad for the regional Super 50. And many people are saying, well, it's a strong team, it's a well-established team, so many big names, but we've had big names before and don't win the title, because the feeling is that a lot of these players have grown beyond the Trinidad and Tobago cricket, that even if they want to play to show their loyalty, that there really isn't that hunger, because they have bigger fish to fry on franchises and so on. So I think it's really up to the administrator to set the bar very high when it comes to discipline, when it comes to fitness, when it comes to dedication, because we've had situations where, and I can speak about it in my own context in Trinidad and Tobago, where players who are established test players don't turn up for practice, are very rude and dismissive to the officials, and even the officials kowtow and bow down to them almost as if they feel that if they attach themselves to famous international players, that will be the key to success as administrators. So it's a really complex situation, but I think bottom line, if you don't set the bar very, very high, you are setting the stage for your decline. And I just want to talk about the Australian situation. After what would have happened in that series against India, that they're going to have a real post-mortem, not the sort of jokey, half-hearted post-mortems that we have in the Caribbean. They're going to have a real post-mortem to ensure that they don't find themselves in a similar situation. And the evidence speaks for itself when it comes to Australian cricket. So if they can do it, why can't we?
But Fazeer, then let me jump in here, and this will apply to certain players in Trinidad and Tobago when I say this. I believe, this is my personal opinion here, that West Indies, and I'm looking at the administrators at the time and the players, because they're not without blame. There was a period between 2012 when Sammy was captain and about 2015. This is when Bravo was captain of the ODI side. And obviously the incident happened in India, and the players pulled out. David Cameron's ego got the better of him, and so on and so forth. Now, I always go back to that era and say that we dropped the ball there. I am not saying we were going to go on and be world beaters. That's not my point. But we certainly had the hallmarks of a competitive side. But I often say this, people, and they don't believe me. Bravo's captaincy of the ODI side, that's the best winning percentage we've had in the last 20 years, I believe, with an ODI captain. I'm not saying that Bravo is an excellent captain, irrespective of all the other things that come with Bravo. He's an excellent captain, and as seen with the Trinbago franchise as well. But when those players came, when that tour was abandoned in India, and effectively Bravo was blackballed from West Indies cricket, Pollard was blackballed from. Neither one of them went to the World Cup that followed the next year. Pollard was blackballed. And the splinter effect, we basically lost Pollard and Bravo for what? Effectively we basically lost them for 6 years, in essence, out of West Indies cricket. Chris Gale, we'd lost him earlier on between 2011 and 2013. And Ronnie Sarwan, he retired at the age of 30, and we basically lost him. You had Shiv basically as the last standing member, the last standing member of that side, as youngsters were put around him. And you could even argue we prematurely let Shiv go. Yes, he was 40, but we prematurely let Shiv go when the side was inexperienced. And I just look back then and say, we lost a generation of players. I'm not saying they were world beaters, Fazeer. I'm not trying to say that, but we lost players who were good enough to compete at the international standard. And that was of our own making. And I'm interested. The reason I'm bringing it to you is because I'm interested to see if you believe we should blame the players for that and their egos, or if actually we, and by we I mean the administrators of West Indies cricket, don't realise the damage they did at the time.
Well, Marshall, I'm glad but the way you said we lost such and such players and so on. Why did we lose them? Why? Is it because that, again, the players really don't want to prioritize West Indies cricket and are using it conveniently for their own purposes? Or is it that our administrators remain locked in their Stone Age mentality that I am the king of the hill and you will obey me, and if you don't, you're going to pay the price? The world has moved on from that. We should have moved on from the Kerry Packer era. And again, it's important to reference those times, because you had a situation where the players, after being paid a mere pittance for so long, were finally getting some real money. And the administrator's attitude was, we don't need you. You can go where you want to go. We don't need you. There was no desire for dialogue. There was no desire to say, look, the world is changing. It can't be as it used to be. And I can take you back even further, and forgive me if I'm taking too much of your time, but 1948-49, the first year of Sir Frank Worrell playing as a Test cricketer, and he opts out of the tour of India. Think about it. Which cricketer would opt out of a tour because he's not being paid as a professional, because he was playing Lancashire League at the time, and he felt what he was being offered was not worthy of his status as a professional cricketer, and was reading up a bit on it, and that he opted out. Yet someone at the time, Jeff Stallmeyer, who was one of the senior individuals involved, a white man and so on, and therefore at the upper echelons of West Indies cricket, he gave a different narrative. He said that it was about indiscipline that Worrell was left out, which was totally not true. So the reason I bring that up is that administrators always have a one-eyed perspective, and visionary administrators recognize the times that they are in, the times where there's player power, players have other opportunities, they have franchises, they have T10 leagues all over the world. One is going on right now in Abu Dhabi and so on. That West Indies cricket to them is not the be and end all. And therefore it requires you as an administrator to say, okay, Dwayne Bravo, Kieron Pollard, we basically set you up by taking away 75% of your money without even telling you about it, which is what precipitated that walkout in India. You have a situation where essentially let's talk about the situation now. Let's work out an arrangement. We recognize that we can't match what you're getting in IPL or PSL or BBL or whatever. But let's talk. Let's hear what you have to say about the situation. And I don't get the sense that there was ever any desire at any point along the track to sit down with the players and say, okay, gentlemen, this is not an ideal situation. We would love you to be committed all the time to the West Indies team, but we don't have the money to match what you're getting outside there. Let's sit and talk about it. And I think that has only happened in the last 2 or 3 years, where there's been a willingness to actually listen to the players. It's always my way or the highway. And that narrow-minded Massa Day attitude, where you listen to me, and if you don't, you're out. It's the same thing with Darren Bravo. I mean, I am not saying Darren Bravo is entirely blameless in his disrespectful attitude towards Dave Cameron, but come on. So because someone says something disrespectful to you, You're going to cut off your nose to spite your face by getting rid of that player until he comes on hands and knees begging for forgiveness. But again, that's the way, sadly, until very, very recently, our administrators have operated.
Santel, do you want to come in?
Yeah, and I was going to say, with the current couple of players, do you think the weight of expectation? I mean, in England, whenever they tour England, there's always comparisons to the golden generation. When Shai Hope scored the twin centuries at Headingley, there was comparisons as to whether he could revive the golden period of West Indies cricket. Do you think this plays on players' minds as well, the current crop, this weight of expectation?
And that's an interesting one, because you often hear different narratives that we're burdening them with Viv Richards and the great fast bowlers and even the 3Ws and Sobers and even going to Lara and Chandapal and so on. That's really putting too much pressure on them. And I tell myself, you know what would be the reaction in the athletic world if we would say, you know what, 9.78 in the 100 meters is really out of reach. Let's change it. Let's make it 9.92. So the new world record for the 100 meters is 9.92, because no one can get close to Usain Bolt's 9.78. People would say, what is so-and-so is wrong with you? If you've got a standard, if you've got a legacy that has been unparalleled in the game, why wouldn't you want to celebrate it? Why? It's not about burdening players. It's about letting them understand that this is the legacy that is being passed on to you. Okay, right now we're in a struggle. Right now we're really in a desperate situation, as we have been for some time. But let's not forget what we've been able to achieve. And if we've done it, we didn't do it once, we did it for an extended period, not just 1980 and 1995. I'm talking about from the Second World War onwards. If we were so good for so long, what do we need to do to get back to it? And as players, I would think that I would want to be uplifted by being told the great deeds of our former players. In this, as children, we grew up with storybooks, learning about what Hansel and Gretel and whoever else and whatever they did and so on, about great stories to inspire us. I grew up reading about Frank Worrell, George Headley and so on, and they were inspiring to me. Why should it be any different now? I understand the issue about really getting down on players and saying, well, Headley averaged 60 or Lara averaged 52 or whatever, you only average 20, you can't be any good. That's the negative connotation to it. But surely you can use it in an uplifting way and say, look, fellas, whether you be considered a second team or not, why not use the Alvin Kalicharan team as your inspiration? Because that team produced, Larry Gomes was already there and he capitalized on it, Malcolm Marshall, Sylvester Clarke, so many players. Take that as the opportunity and look at it as something that you can turn into a positive, never mind all the ridicule, and make something of it. It really comes down to the individual.
So, Fazeer, when you're on duty on TV and you're invited to to cover different series and this, that, and the other. So, Santoki and I, when we're invited by other podcasts to maybe have a conversation, we often start like these people be like, so what do you think is going to happen? And we're like, well, obviously we're going to lose the series. And people often label us as pessimists when we say that. But I see you in a similar light. You are very much what I call a straight shooter in the cricket game with regards to West Indies. And you, like before the Bangladesh series, I think I saw you on Sports Mats, and you were like, yeah, we're going to lose. And when we went to New Zealand, you were like, we are going to lose. We're going to lose. History tells us that we're going to lose that series. But we can get away with it because we're nobody's really in the grand scheme of things. But do you ever find that you get backlash against the fact that, rightly or wrong, I'm going to say that you're quite outspoken and you back your views. If you believe in what you say, you will repeat it as well. But do you ever think that do you sense you get backlash over that?
Well, first and foremost, you guys are not nobodies. And I just want to make that clear. I'm not just saying to be flattering. You all are playing your part in the preservation of a great legacy by reminding people of our history and having these dialogues and having these context or dialogues. So you are not nobodies, especially in the world of social media, which I'm alien to. I'm not on social media at all, by the way. So when people are cussing me left, right, and center, I have no idea what is going on. But the issue is that, I mean, whether it's the way you're brought up, I was brought up to just say it as it is, not necessarily be rude, But say it as it's like saying if a weather forecaster this morning, let's say we're in hurricane season in Kingston, Jamaica, and Hurricane Gilbert in 1980 is bearing down on Jamaica. And as a weather forecaster, I come up to you on TVG and say, well, you know what? I think we should be positive about this. It's not going to hit us, right? So I'm telling you that it's going to fly past us. You can go out on the beach, you can have a good time and whatever. And Hurricane Gilbert ravages Jamaica. And by then I should be out of a job because I haven't done my job. You are asking me my opinion on upcoming series. All I can do is tell you what I believe is going to happen based on the empirical evidence. And if you say, well, you know, that sounds negative, that sounds pessimistic, why do you keep decrying the West Indies? I said, well, why do they keep losing? It's not me. So are you saying that? So are you saying that if I would say, you know, the West Indies were going to win in New Zealand, we would win? Are you saying that? Sometimes I wonder if people abandon logic when it comes to these issues. Oh, why are you so negative? Why do you keep saying these things? I say, well, if they would stop losing, it might help. I don't know why and I understand it to a point, because when you listen to a lot of coverage of sport generally, not just cricket, it's basically PR. It's basically former players bigging up their own, saying this one is so great, this one is so fantastic, or he's dropped a catch, but he doesn't really drop catches and all of that. It's almost as if you're scared to say things negative because they'll pull you out of the commentary box. And as a result of that, it's all syrupy, it's all sweet soaped, it's all painted in a particular way. But at the end of the day, you lose badly. What can you say? And I think it's that dose of reality which is so important. I'm not saying that because it's me saying. I'm saying that this is what it is. If you're not going to accept where you are, if you're not going to appreciate the depth to which we have sunk, if you're not going to understand that teams that we would have routinely beat, we are now taken for granted as whipping boys, and understand that reality, and keep saying, oh, we've got to do better, we've got to think positive, you can't be so negative. If you refuse from a mental perspective, from a mindset, to accept where we are, how can you possibly hope to recover from that?
And you've made mention of the last 2 to 3 years. So, and I expect to know less. But I was about to say I want your genuine answer, but I expect no less. Ricky Skerritt is 2 years, coming up to 2 years into the job with Kishore Shallow as head of Cricket West Indies. My personal view is that he has done. I think I was asked on Jamaican radio a few weeks back what I thought, and I said I'd give him a 7 out of 10. And the reason I said that is because he has re-established relationships with players who he thought were now lost to West Indies cricket. I think bringing back Pollard back into the fold was a masterstroke in terms of getting him to become white ball captain and therefore by default get commitment to West Indies cricket again. I think the root and branch, what do I want to say here? The root and branch approach to the governance reviews, the selection reviews and all that, I think all of that is things to be applauded. I think the question mark is how now do they go from doing that to getting all the other stakeholders? And I think sometimes people who aren't in the Caribbean or who don't study the West Indies setup don't understand the difficulty that getting all of the islands and all of the administrators within those islands to buy into one mission. So it's good that they've done a governance review, but I am skeptical, Fazeer, if other directors, particularly people who, I'm not calling any names, but particularly people who might have been friendly to the last regime, will want to buy into change. Because unless I've got this wrong, Fazeer, effectively what Skerritt and Shallow are recommending, it's almost like turkeys voting for Christmas and maybe losing a lot of influence that they are used to, a lot of the cronyism that they're used to. So I don't know how many roadblocks he's going to possibly face, and there's an election coming up. I don't know how many roadblocks he's going to face to try and actually implement change? Because going back to what you said earlier on in the piece, we can't really change anything unless it changes from the top. Or do you think I've got that wrong there?
No, I think you've got it perfectly right, which is why it reinforced my point that you guys are not nobodies. You've read it perfectly. I think the 7 out of 10 is more or less what I would go with as well, simply for that intention, that transformation that we so desperately need. And you guys understand it. You have people in the directorships in West Indies cricket who are bent on undermining the process. It's as simple as that. It's because they didn't vote for these guys and they're going to do their best. We all know about it. We know about the position of the BCA, the Barbados Cricket Association.
Okay, you called the names then. You called names.
Exactly. I mean, and let's not forget it as well, that you've got a situation where, and this is where the tricky part comes in. It was, as much as we might say that their intentions were sincere for the proper transformation of West Indies cricket, it was treachery that brought Ricky Skerritt and Kishore Shallow into office, because you had two people who vouched that they were going to back Dave Cameron, which is why he felt comfortable that he couldn't lose, who, when it came to the vote, voted for Ricky Skerritt and Kishore Shallow. So when you've got into office, even with the best of intentions, in that manner, you've got to be mindful, you've got to watch your back, because you know there's a good chance that's going to happen to you when the next election comes around in a couple months' time. So it makes it difficult. It makes it almost impossible to really get the job done when you always have to watch your back, when you always have to be mindful of playing the political game. And also, it almost seems a defensive posture by us in the West Indies, that from the moment a critical observation is made, the immediate thing you ask yourself is, this guy is out to get me. This guy is against me. This guy, who is he conspiring with from Barbados or Trinidad or Guyana or wherever to get rid of me? That seems to be very much a Caribbean mentality, rather than simply say, what are the merits or the demerits of this particular point? And I think that's why it's so difficult. You're right, Marshall. We need that transformation. We need a West Indies cricket board, not two from Trinidad, two from Barbados, two from Guyana, two from wherever, because that just concretizes the politics. Because your two are seen as their primary objective is to champion your narrow interests. And unless we get away from that, unless we get a truly professional administration, which I know is difficult because of the politics of the Caribbean, I know it's difficult, but unless we're prepared to say that this is the only way, rather than have these 12 directors basically playing political games when they come together, that's the only way you're going to have that strength of leadership, because it's pointless having a professional CEO, having a professional cricket director, having a professional chief operations officer, when their well thought out plans and projections are shot down for politics.
Yeah.
What's the point? What's the point? Continue.
What do you see happening in the next election? Do you see Skerritt retaining?
Well, I find it very difficult to read, because I said 2 years ago that Dave Cameron couldn't lose. I said it openly that there was no way that Cameron could lose, and then he lost. So again, I think Skerritt's position is a bit tenuous, because again, unless you're kowtowing to all of the directors and so on and making promises to them, which always happens when we talk about politics, he could be in some trouble. But again, I think it depends on what the alternative is. If it is that Cameron wants to go up for another tilt, seeing that he didn't get the nomination for the ICC chairmanship, if he can stir things up a bit with Barbados again and other territories and promise things that may have them feeling, well, look, let's get rid of Skerritt and company. But I would like to see them being given another couple of years, not necessarily because they are perfect, because I think there's still too much political baggage that they bring along with them. And having to do favors to appease certain people and so on. But I would like to see them being given another 2 years, because 2 years is really nothing when you're talking about the administration of West Indies cricket. But again, it depends on how the politics swing in a couple of months' time.
Santoki, do you want to run some questions?
Yeah, let's go through some questions. So we had quite a few for you, Fazeer. So the first one's from Sumit Dahal. He says, given the current skewed power structures in world cricket, what kind of changes do you want to see coming from the ICC on a global level to enable teams like West Indies to become more competitive? And how optimistic are you of that?
Well, I first and foremost would like to see the ICC being something more than a glorified umbrella, because that's what the ICC is. The ICC is a joke as far as international administration, because the ICC wait until the BCCI tell them what to do. Basically, the BCCI runs world cricket in the same way that England and Australia ran world cricket until India woke up to their own economic power and dominance. And I can't think of any international sporting organization that is as much of a joke as the ICC. Where, just to give you a simple example, India says we don't want to use DRS, whether Tendulkar doesn't like it or not or whatever, and they don't use DRS. And the rest of the world goes along with that. Can you imagine in world football, England, the so-called founders of the game or the rules of the game, saying, you know what, we disagree with penalty shootouts. We're not going to have penalty shootouts. The FIFA will say, well, thank you very much, you're not playing in our tournaments. But in cricket, India does what they want because they are the powers in the game. I would like to see the ICC recognize that international cricket is not just about India, Australia, and England. That it's not just about the Ashes. That the Ashes shouldn't be the only series of 5 test matches. I was listening to the dialogue during the last test match in Australia where they were saying, where I listened to Alan Board, I think, was saying that, you know, given the competitors of the series, I think India are worth a 5 test series against Australia. So you have to reach a certain level to be bestowed with a 5 test series. Why isn't, in the same way where international sport is standardized, why isn't international cricket, why aren't international tours standardized, where every tour you go on, it's 3 tests, 3 one-dayers, 3 T20s? Why is it that when the so-called lesser countries, and we have to include ourselves, the West Indies, when we go to certain places, you only get 2 test matches, or you only get 3 test matches, or you can't get 5, or you're not worthy of 5 because look how poor you are. Well, okay, we're so poor and you're not helping the cause because the minnows only play the minnows these days, and when the minnows play the big fish, they're slaughtered. So what do you expect? You hear the lamentation about the growing divide in the international game, which these big nations, with the blessing of the ICC, have allowed. So to answer your question, sorry for taking so long again, Santoki, but it would be nice if the ICC were to grow some testicles or some ovaries or whatever they have to grow to get it done, and actually govern the game in the way a sport should be governed.
I mean, Santoki, before you go to the next one, I'll admit to you, Fazeer, that I didn't even know until this week, and Santoki had to tell me that England are playing India in India, then India are playing England in and I had no idea. So this year alone, India and England are playing 9 tests between themselves, and that doesn't make, well, it makes sense for them because they're going to financially benefit, but I don't see how that shows any level of intention to grow the game, other than because
Marshall, they have no interest in the growth of the game. They give them a chance. They would do what some of the big clubs in European football want to do. They would go it on their own and have their own Super League of 3 and try to find some nice way to refer to it as maybe an elite league, and where the rest of us are in the Super League or whatever it is. And we have to reach a certain level to get the opportunity to play against them. And that's the point. Remember, there was once the talk about the big 3 in 2014. They were trying to really get things their own way. Michael Holding famously talked about it during the 2015 World Cup when he was down in Australia, and he talked about England, Australia, and India hijacking the game for their own benefit. That hasn't changed. It's just more nuanced now. They're using more political language to do exactly what they're doing. And by us as because we go with the begging bowl to ICC meetings, saying, what can we do to get you to come to play a test series against us? What can we do to get your television rights? What can we do for you to bestow us with your presence to play against us? That should not be the lowest to the highest. If you're talking, and I drew this reference in 2017, when I was on commentary during that series in England, when Michael Vaughan was talking about having a second division of test playing nations. And I said, well, you know, Huddersfield have just been promoted to the English Premier League. They are the very bottom of the tree. Shouldn't they be playing against Manchester United just 45 minutes instead of 90 minutes because they're not worthy of playing against Man United for 90 minutes? And he said, well, that's ludicrous. I said, well, what you're saying is equally ludicrous. If you're considered a test-playing nation, we should all be equal. We should all operate on the same parameters because that's the only way you're going to have competitiveness. But England, Australia, and India are not interested in competitiveness. They are interested in dominating financially and on the field to govern the game.
Yeah, I think kind of what highlights everyone's awareness of the power structures is me and Michelle have discussed previously on our previous pods, and also a lot of followers have said, obviously we respect players' decisions not to tour Bangladesh. It's their health. We're in a pandemic at the moment. But if the exact same COVID protocols and bubble security features were presented to players and the tour was in India, Australia, or England, would we have seen the same amount of players pull out from that tour? Whether it be from pressure from financial pressure or pressure from administrators, or was this mass pullout because Bangladesh are considered minnows in the power structure of global cricket that the players felt more comfortable to withdraw from that tour?
Absolutely, and you've answered the question there, Santoki. I mean, I respect the players' right if there are concerns about COVID-19 and so on. But let's be real. Let's be real about it. I'm sure in that would have influenced the decision. And again, to bring it in context, it was just early last year or maybe late 2019 that Australia cancelled the tour of Bangladesh. There was no COVID around at the time because it wasn't financially worthwhile. Yeah. They have hosted Sri Lanka in their winter period in the north of Queensland and Cairns and Townsville and so on, because they felt that Sri Lanka aren't worthy of our summer game. This is the arrogance that you have to deal with. And again, I think we need to because people are scared to call it out. They are scared to call it out because they're going to lose something. They're going to lose some big position administratively. They're going to lose some commentary opportunity. They're going to lose something. People are scared to call it out. That essentially it's England, Australia, India dominating financially. And because they run the game financially, they set the rules and everyone else is expected to oblige. And people are scared to point out the obvious contradictions.
Okay, I guess a big one, Fazeer, you've probably been asked this a few times. Is there still a desire in the West Indies from players and fans for Test cricket?
Not as much, clearly not as much as it used to be. The evidence is there. The dwindling crowds, hardly anyone turns up for Test match cricket. Certainly at the established venues, you don't see it anymore. It would not be true to say that we've always had full houses right up to the 1990s, because I remember as a youngster going to the Queen's Park Oval, it was half filled for Test cricket. So the interest has been dwindling for some time, but now it's really chronic. It's chronic to the level where people really aren't too bothered. They're not even concerned. The players, though, I would say, I'm involved, for example, in my local community, in my neck of the woods in San Juan, in Trinidad. We run a coaching clinic that my dad started some 28 years ago. And you still see youngsters hungry, eager to play the game. They love the game. And it's just about channeling them as seniors and adults with that knowledge and that history of Test cricket and one days and yes, T20s as well. Nothing is wrong with that, because that is the common trend in the game. But yes, you're right. It's the same thing as with any other sport in any other part of the world. If you watch NFL, the days pre-COVID, from the time that a team starts to lose in an NFL season, coming towards November, December, the stands are half empty because people are fed up of losing. Any human being will be fed up of that negative connotation of being associated with a losing team. And that's where it's incumbent on the administrators and the players. I wouldn't say that love for Test cricket has died. It hasn't died. It's still there. You still people call on the radio and cuss and get on and say this one and that one and so on. That's because the passion is there. Not too many people can give up 5 days from their work schedules to watch Test cricket as well, which again brings us to the whole history of Test cricket as to how it came about. The elites having nothing to do with their lovely lifestyles in the 1800s and playing cricket for 5 days when the working class had to work and couldn't play the game. So, and it brings us to the modern era. So it's about West Indies cricket. If we're going to get people to love Test cricket, to want to go and watch Test cricket, you have to be winning. You have to see our players, even if not winning, trying, fighting hard, battling to show that hunger and that desire. And that's going to take some effort.
I mean, I always say, Santoki, that if the Caribbean populace no longer cared about cricket, you would, when CPL comes, obviously last year was COVID, but the stands are packed for CPL. Queen's Park Oval is jumping. Providence is jumping. Sabina is jumping when the CPL sides are in and around the place. And also, actually, for the last Super 50 we had, when the emerging players won it, I was surprised. But I'm not saying Queen's Park Oval wasn't full, but there were people there for the final, and it wasn't Trinidad in the final. Now, I know there were some Trini players in the, I think, Yannick,
the emerging players.
Within this. So there were players from the nation in the side, but people had turned out for a domestic final in Trinidad, and it wasn't Trinidad in the final. So there are people will turn up.
That's the magic of television for you. There was almost nobody in the ground. They put all the spectators in one part of the stand so that the cameras could give you many different angles
I'll take
of the same spectator.
Now. Because the way it's on TV, because I think I put it to, I can't remember which guest we put it to, and I said I was shocked to see people at the Super 50 final, because obviously there'd been no one really attending throughout the whole tournament. But on TV, because of now you've told me, it looked like there was fans. I take it all back, everyone.
me and Michelle thought there was about 20,000 in there for that.
Yeah, exactly. There were probably about 200 actually.
But I think also Michelle wrote an article for the Cricketer asking whether it's time for Jason Holder to give up captaincy for the West Indies in terms of the Test cricket, and that got a lot of talking in the Caribbean on social media, online. So that as well does show that there is interest, at least, whether it be people not turning up to matches. There is definitely interest in West Indian Test cricket from Caribbean fans.
Hold on, Fazeer, before you cuss me for it. Before you cuss me for the article, let me just do a disclaimer and say that the reason why I wrote it isn't so much because I'm saying that Jason isn't a good captain, although I did put some points in there. I'm surprised that Jason doesn't want to give it up himself. 5 years is a long time to carry the burden of West Indies captaincy with a side that rarely wins games. So part of the article was also about saying, why does Jason not want to give this up? But that, sorry to now speak a bit more about it, but that to me speaks about our crisis of leadership, that we can't even tell you who could replace Jason because we haven't developed anybody. So
Exactly.
it was obvious to bring Pollard as ODI captain because look at his experience all around the world. But Red Bull, who?
Yeah, and I think, again, Masha, there's no need to have to apologize for your view. I mean, the point is that I think what we need to appreciate, that whatever you say, when it comes to like West Indies cricket or any issue that is a very emotive one, you're going to get cussed by some and praised by some. The issue is whether you hold to your view, and you're right. The point is that as Jason Holder, who was thrown in at the deep end, I felt unfairly, basically having barely established himself to be captain of the team because of that fiasco of India 2014. He had to captain the team at the World Cup and then was made Test captain and so on. The same was said of Darren Sammy, that he was made captain to really undermine the power of the established players like Dwayne Bravo, to get Bravo out of the Test team and all those sorts of things. The issue is, has he become, like so many others, almost impervious to the impact of losing, that you lose so often that the sting, you don't really feel that, and he is by nature, and we've seen it, a very conservative person, very conservative in his captaincy and so on. But so I think it's a fair point. It's fair to ask the question in that sense. But really, overall, when you look at the situation with West Indies cricket and where we are now, I almost forgot the question that Santoki asked me because we diverted into so many different directions. But I just think that there's enough passion, there's enough interest, there's enough desire that we can resurrect the situation, because, as you mentioned, with Darren Sammy 2012, 2013, when we won 6 Test matches in a row, when Chris Gayle was captain, when we beat England in the Caribbean, when we were competitive in South Africa, when with his broken hand he batted heroically in a Test match and so on. So we've had periods along the way. The challenge is really sustaining it.
I've got one question here, Santoki, I just want to say from Teal, because it's pertinent to just the fact that Fazeer's in Trinidad. Chatil wrote in and said, Fazeer, what has happened to Darren Bravo? He once used to average high 40s. Now, earlier on, Fazeer, I said that the last good, genuine batsman we had were Shiv, Ronnie, and Chris. If you had asked me this 3 years ago, I would have put Darren Bravo in there as well. And you are close. I'm not saying you are close to him personally, but being in Trinidad, you're closer to understanding maybe more than most. What do you think? And we know what happened with Darren with his fallout with Dave Cameron, but do you think Darren can revitalize his career? Because he's only 31.
I think he can if he really wants to, and that is the issue. I'm not sure if the hunger is still there, because if the hunger was there, he'd be putting in the work. I mean to be softened up by a short ball from Neil Wagner in New Zealand. You don't expect that. You don't expect that from someone who's a top line player, who's a top line batsman, who at one point averaged over 40 outside of the Caribbean. He averaged more outside of the West Indies than he did in the West Indies. Now it's a steady decline both ways, and therefore, yes, the whole Dave Cameron thing would have probably impacted him as far as his hunger for the game and so on. But as you said correctly, Marshall, he is 31 years of age. 31 is pretty much your prime as a batsman. 31 is the time when you've played enough cricket in all parts of the world, in all conditions, to really be able to set your stall out and dominate. And he doesn't do that. He doesn't. He gives you the odd cameo here and there. He played that excellent half century in Antigua, a slow half century, but a vital half century against England in 2019, which I actually described as the finest test innings he's ever played, because of the context, because of all that was involved with it and the role he had to play in that innings. And I felt that would have been the springboard to see a much improved Darren Bravo. It hasn't happened. And I don't think he can blame anybody but himself.
Interesting.
Michelle, we've asked a lot of big and deep questions so far to Fazeer, but do you want to wrap it up with the biggest question of all?
Right. Yes, we're gonna bring this one to a close, Fazeer. And there's only, do you know what? Because of your unique role as a commentator, normally it would be one question, but we're going to break it down into three. So, what's your favorite innings that you have witnessed by a West Indian batsman? And that's live in the ground. What is your favorite ground? You're not allowed to vote for your own nation. So what is what is your favorite ground in the Caribbean? And what's your favorite ground outside the Caribbean? And over the whole generation of West Indies cricket, who has been your favorite player to watch? So I'll say it one more time. So your favorite innings that you've seen, or was it four? It was four actually. Yeah, good point. Your favorite innings that you've seen personally. Your favorite ground in the Caribbean, but it can't be Queen's Park Oval. Your favorite ground away outside the Caribbean, and the West Indian player who you have enjoyed watching the most over your career.
Right, let's go. Favorite innings that I've seen live: Brian Lara's 153 not out against Australia in 1999 in Barbados, where the West Indies chased down 309 to win by 1 wicket. Of course, fantastic innings, fantastic circumstances. Confrontation, McGrath, Warne, Gillespie, McGill, and the context of the series. He was on probation after the debacle of South Africa. He followed it up with the double 100 in Jamaica after West Indies were routed for 53 in Trinidad. And then that incredible innings, 153 not out, taking the West Indies to that victory. And forgive the vanity, being involved in commentary, on radio commentary, being involved towards the end as well. So that's why it really sticks in my mind. So that, without any question, is my favorite innings live, having seen it. Favorite ground outside of Queen's Park Oval. It was never going to be Queen's Park Oval anyway. It's actually the border ground in Guyana.
Oh my goodness gracious.
It's no longer used for international cricket. But because, again, when you're a radio commentator, as I was at the time, up to the late 1990s and then early 2000s, before they changed to Providence, you would sit at border, and it's a very closed venue, with the tall wooden stands, the Clive Lloyd stand, the Lance Gibbs stand, the Rowan Kanai stand. And because Guyana is South American mainland, it's very different from the Caribbean territories with the sort of island vibe sort of thing. In Guyana, you can actually sit down on an evening of commentary, watching the sun heading westwards over the Demerara River, and see blue and gold macaws flying by, scarlet and green macaws flying by. And to me, it encapsulated a perspective on a game for full house at border, great contest going on, beautiful imagery, birds flying by. I don't think there's any better image in international cricket than border, a full house and a real contest going on. So that answers your second question. Third question now, that is my favorite ground internationally. Again, it's one that I'm sure nobody's going to pick. It's the WACA, the ground at Perth. And again, that's again because of nostalgia. Because when I first started to really listen to the game with any great interest, that 75-76 series that I talked about, that was the venue that the West Indies won. We won by an innings inside 4 days with Roy Fredericks scoring 169. He got 100 of 71 balls. And just listening to that sold me the idea that somehow or the other, whether as a player, whether as a tourist, whether as a commentator, I had to see the WACA in Perth. And when I first went there in 1996-97, I just sat there in the ground and let the memories wash over me of actually being at that venue. What I consider, which people consider a pretty ugly, basic venue, I consider to be an iconic venue in my own mind as an international cricket venue. Now, to answer your question about famous player, that's easy. Anderson, Montgomery, Everton, Roberts. Andy Roberts is not just my favorite West Indian cricketer, but my favorite cricketer of all time. Because again, it depends on your age and at what point in your life you're exposed. I was 9 years old when Andy Roberts played his first test match against England in Barbados in 1974. He was the one who destroyed Australia in that WACA test match of 75-76. He was the one, together with Derek Murray, who won us that famous World Cup match with that victory with the last wicket pair at the World Cup in 1975. And he was the forerunner to our great era of dominant fast bowlers, because when you had Roberts, then you had Holding, then you had Croft, then you had Garner, and so on and so forth. And I've always admired Andy Roberts for that steely, cold sort of attitude. And I was actually in fear of him as a human being, because as a journalist, I almost didn't want to approach him. And then I realized that he was a really nice guy and we chat very often and so on. But when you talk about my favorite cricketer of all time, it's Andy Roberts. No one even come close. No Brian Lara, I love Viv Richards and so on, but no one comes close to Andy Roberts.
Do you know what? When people listen to this, Santoki, I guarantee nobody, maybe Lara's one they might be able to have predicted, possibly. But none of those other three answers would anyone ever be like.
I was going to say, Fazeer's the first Trinidadian we've had on the show to name a Guyanese venue as his favourite venue. That's normally like a Barcelona fan saying their favourite venue is the Bernabeu or
something. Well, Fazeer, as we expected, you've been a fantastic guest, and it's been brilliant to get your insight on all things West Indies. This is probably going to come out after we've lost the third ODI to Bangladesh. But just to see if you are in agreement, what do you think is going to happen in the Test series against Bangladesh?
I think we're going to lose as well. But I mean, with our strongest team, we lost 2 years ago. We lost by 64 runs. We lost by an innings. Why should we expect it to be any different this time around, if not worse?
Well, you've heard it here first from Fazeer, but we look forward to the upcoming Bangladesh series, and actually, Fazeer, we're more looking forward to the Super 50 this year, because because everybody's playing. Everybody who could play has actually, for the first, 2018 they kind of did as well, but everybody is playing in this year's Super 50 tournament. So we're actually looking forward to seeing what should be some good domestic cricket this year.
And I think what we want to see is our players really wanting to play. You don't want to see players almost as if they're condescending to play, that they want to play for their territories and they want to play for the West Indies. And yeah, okay, we're going to lose the Test series to Bangladesh, but I want to see our players turning up as if they really want to play for the West Indies. That's all I could ask for.
Mm-hmm. So, ladies and gentlemen, that has been Fazeer Mohammed. This one's been a brilliant episode to have. If we do say so ourselves, it should be out shortly. And whether you're listening to this, whether you watch this on YouTube or whether you are listening to this via whatever podcast, I hope you enjoy it. Share it with your friends, family, etc. Fazeer, we wish you well. We look forward to seeing you. Are you commentating on Super 50? I presume so.
No, I'm not, because our borders are locked down in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's really difficult because at this point you can't take it for granted that if you get out, you're going to be able to get back in. So I'll be out of that tournament.
So we'll look forward to either hearing you on the airwaves or seeing you on TV when whichever one of the test series comes to, or limited over series comes to Trinidad later this year. Of the many that are coming. So we look forward to seeing you then, Fazeer. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. Ladies and gents, that's been episode 34 of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Thank you and good night.
We rule the cricket world.